Have you given any thought to contributing to the melt? It's easy to do. Just click the Patreon link in the episode notes, and for as little as $3 a month, you can get access to bonus episodes, early access to regular episodes, and you can also participate in monthly Zoom meetups. It helps to keep the magic happening here at the Melt. So I encourage you to karmically entangle yourself with the Melt today by subscribing monthly for less than the price of a container of goatee wax, or a prosthetic pinky, or a half stick of DMT butter, or an inflatable casket, or the shrunken head of an Atlantean supermodel, or a woolly mammoth's merkin, or a crystalline replica of Baba Yaga's hut, or a capsule of Sasquatch dander.
This is Hunter Muse.
And this is Chris Snipes, and you are listening
to The Melt.
One of the most important things that I think astrology can remind us of is that everything is interconnected. Recently, Hunter and I were on a fungal excursion out in the woods, and as we were sitting at the campfire, we leaned our heads back and gazed at the many stars above us. Because it was far away from the normal light pollution that we experience where we live, there were many more stars that were visible. They almost seemed like they were reflections in a huge pool of dark water, and they felt like they weren't all that far away. And that brought home the truth that, for all intents and purposes, they might as well have been a few hundred feet above us. And it seemed more palpable that they and us had more to do with one another than most of us imagine. Today's guest, Sidereal astrologer Athen Chimenti, is here today to talk with us about that connection. I start off the conversation by asking Athen what sidereal astrology is and how it differs from the kind of astrology that most of us are familiar with.
Right. And I think that's the best way of differentiating it. As you mentioned, in astronomy, sidereal is used a lot because that is what they're doing, right? They're using sidereal in astronomy. So sidereal basically means referencing the stars, right? So obviously astronomy does that, and you would think astrology does that. In fact, when everyone hears their sun sign and it's Gemini or whatever it is, you would think that is where the sun was when you were born. But it's not like that. So mainstream astrology does not reference the sky. So they use, in the West, they use what's called tropical astrology. And this basically centers the zodiac around the seasons, which is kind of a weird concept, right? Because the zodiac is in the sky. So you go up at the night sky, you see the zodiac in the sky. But what tropical is doing is they're actually fixing that band or those constellations around the seasons so that when it's the beginning of spring, i.e. the sun, it's right at the spring equinox, the sun is at 0 degrees Aries in their system. So Aries is the first constellation. So they start the whole zodiac based around the seasons and the spring equinox. So it's very interesting. So right now it's one sign, about one sign apart. In some situations, it's up to 2 signs different. And so, for those, let's say, who have their sun in, let's say, Gemini, it'd actually be in Taurus, typically, the constellation before. So, yeah, large gap between the 2 systems, and almost always it's different in the signs. But long story short is that true sidereal is using the visible sky. So for those that think it's Gemini, if they were to go out, and well, in this case, if they're to use a planetarium software and look back at their date of birth, they would see the sun is actually in Taurus at that time. Yeah.
So how did tropical astrology sort of become the go-to? Like if it has so many obvious inaccuracies, why is it the one that we use?
Right. It's actually very interesting. I don't know if it's a synchronicity or if it's, I don't know. But at the time that at the time astrology in general actually just became very popular. So this would have been during, more recently, so it'd been like ancient Greece and during the Roman Empire. And so at that time, when it was the spring, it was Aries. So it just happens to be that way. And at the time, it made sense to simplify it so that instead of having to do those calculations, because the calculations to use the true sidereal, the actual placements, is quite cumbersome, because we'll get into it, something called precession, and it does change the sky. So the sky's not, in the same place every year relative to the sun, for example. So it's always changing. So at the time, it made sense to just say, okay, well, if you're on this date, then you're this, because it was, pretty much that. But because of precession is changing the sky. It's very subtle, but over large periods of time, it becomes noticeable. So it's 1 degree of zodiac band. So there's 360 degrees in the zodiac. So it's 1 degree of zodiac band every 72 years. Okay, so over, a lifetime, it's not going to change anything. But over, like we have now, thousands of years since then, now we have that full sign difference almost. So it made sense at the time. And, tropical was used there. Well, it was used about 200 to 300 AD. So Ptolemy kind of made it like popular at that time, just said, let's just simplify it. Let's just fix it to the seasons. But then they just kept using it throughout the Middle Ages. And we can get into theories as to why that's the case. Me personally, I believe that there's some deception going on there, because I do believe the elite, particularly the church and the monarchy, wanted to use the real astrology for themselves. And so, of course, they're not going to share this knowledge with the people. So the people kept using tropical for these thousands of years while the zodiac was changing. And it's been this way pretty much ever since we basically got the technology now to use smartphones and, computers now, where we can actually calculate these true positions versus having to do it by hand, which again is extremely cumbersome to do.
Yeah. And now we're left with newspaper astrology. That's our sun signs,
right,
all encapsulated in one simple paragraph. And it's going to show us how successful we're going to be with our boutique that we're about ready to open or whatever. Yeah, that does seem
exactly.
that seems a little very deceptive. So do you think that the elites up to this day are still engaged in actually using the real astrology to sort of orchestrate things or to time events to, or how that goes?
Yeah, I believe so. I believe the elite are using true sidereal. They're very much into the occult and ancient knowledge. That's of course all hidden, but yeah, I'm convinced they do. So there's certain situations where it's like more conducive to do certain things. Like that's what I think astrology is best used for, is for basically being in accordance with it. So like the weather, like you want to do certain things during the summertime, you want to do certain things during the winter time, or if it's sunny or if it's raining. So astrology, I think also gets a bad rap because it's this idea that it can predict the future. And there are certainly a lot of astrologers, and especially in the East, like in Vedic Hindu astrology, where they do believe that. But me personally, I don't believe that life is predetermined like this. But we can certainly see the weather, basically, i.e., what is the cycle that we're in at a certain time. And based on where we're at in that cycle, it is more conducive for certain things over others. And the elites are certainly, in my opinion, certainly using that. And it becomes very apparent when you start to see that a lot of the things that they release, so like the last one that came to mind, and I was talking about this on the Crow Show, we predicted the exact release of the vaccine for that COVID vaccine. And they did it right on the eclipse. And it was also in the constellation of Ophiuchus, which is the healing. It's supposed to be true healing constellation, but they obviously use it for their own, medical benefits. But that was like a perfect timing of things. So you see this kind of repetitively, same with like certain movies and, things, especially in the media, releasing it at these certain times. So they're obviously choosing to release it at this time. So it's not just the weather. In that, yes, when things are in Ophiuchus, we do see more medical kind of things. But when you see that they're actually choosing these dates, and these dates are corresponding on very important astrological dates, to me, that's a huge indication that they are using the true sidereal specifically, because it aligns with those certain things. Like Ophiuchus isn't in the mainstream astrology, for example.
So with sidereal, with true sidereal, are you using an ephemeris to do the plotting of a chart, or is there another system?
Yeah, that's basically what it is. So the software is using the ephemeris. So, the most accurate one would be NASA. And so that's the one I use on my website, which, say what you will about NASA, but at least with the data they're presenting, it is the visible sky. So in this case, it's all calculated. They have the calculations. And so it's just using the quote unquote science that they're using to determine where the placements will be in the future. And then we just plot those in the chart. So it's basically astronomy, but for astrology, which is really kind of a misnomer because it should actually be that. But yeah, you could even call true sidereal like astronomical astrology for that reason. Yeah.
And you were saying they were sort of doing it with the seasons in concordance with the seasons. The seasons are becoming more and more abstract the more that the weather is being influenced, I think, by chemtrails and things that are unnatural in order to, whatever reason they may give, to alleviate or slow down global warming or to, I don't know. Give me some more chemtrail reasons. But it seems like
blacken the sun.
Blacken the sun, yes, in a very Matrix sort of way. But it seems like, yeah, even that sort of clock is sort of being obscured in a way. And it does seem like this is an orchestrated agenda to sort of disassociate us from the natural scheme and natural rhythm of things.
Yeah.
And one I like the one of the angles that you take is that learning this stuff is empowering, because then you can learn how to better execute things in your life by the way that the constellations and stars are aligning themselves. So I like that. And on your website, do you offer ways to learn more about sidereal astrology? Do you sort of give classes, or do you have courses, or?
Yeah, so I have a bunch of videos. So it's a bunch of free content. So you can find that on the website, masteringthezodiac.com, or also YouTube. So I have a YouTube channel by the same name, Mastering the Zodiac. So yeah, there's a good intro video. It's called The Astrology Deception. So a lot like what we're talking about, but it goes into the differences between true sidereal and the mainstream. And, kind of what we were talking about, how it used to be the seasons, that made sense. And then now it's become this pop astrology, as you said, the mainstream one that separated us from the true sky, from nature, right? So yeah, it's about a 12-minute video. It's called The Astrology Deception. It's definitely a good first place to start.
And
Mhm.
for people who are, they totally associate astrology with what you see in the newspaper. This may be like a very obvious question, but why is astrology important, especially sidereal astrology? Why is it important to know that this is an actual thing? This is an actual practice,
Science.
field of study, science. Yes, thank you.
Yeah. So, I mean, the most important thing is, I think is what we're all alluding to, which is just simply just go out and be in nature and look up at the night sky yourself. But astrology is a tool. And so, as a tool, it does have its benefits. And I don't believe everyone should necessarily use astrology, because, again, it's really just about getting back to nature and feeling the energy. Because, like, when you're grounded, you're barefoot in nature, like, you're spending time outdoors, like you're just naturally connected to the flows and the cycles already. So you don't need to introduce some man-made thing like astrology to help you do that, right? That's in our inherent nature. But if you do want to use, the tool, then it's much like the weather. So like the weather forecaster, it's helpful to know if it's going to rain tomorrow or there's going to be a storm coming or something like this. You don't even really need the weather forecaster though, right? Because if you just go outside and you can tell. But it does have its uses, and I think that's a good use case for it. Is much like the weather, is being able to, in a sense, predict, but not predict an exactness, but predict a probability that certain events might happen. But more importantly, what is that weather going to be like, and how can you align to it? And so when that time comes, you're just a little bit more prepared, I suppose, of structuring your life in a way that's conducive for that time period. Just like if it's raining, may not be the best time to wash your car. You can, it's not going to hurt anything, but it is nice to kind of know that, and so you can kind of shape some things in your life around using the weather.
Sure.
In that sense. Yeah.
Do you ever use astrology in business? Like if you are going to do business with someone, would you ever try to do their chart to see if it would be a good fit for you?
Yeah, if it's just a short-term contract or like something day to day, I don't get too bogged into the astrology with that. But certainly if I'm gonna like form some sort of long-term partnership or some long-term agreement or something like that, I personally do. Yeah. So we do the synastry, which is just check the two charts and see, what is the life path energy for each of them and whether it's conducive, because some things can be moving in opposite directions, and then obviously knowing that ahead of time could be helpful. One person might be heading this direction, you might be heading the other, so that's good to know. And then just the overall weather for business stuff, so like a real popular one, maybe some of the listeners might have heard this before, but Mercury retrograde, right? Because it gets really blown up in the mainstream. But the way they talk about it is like this horrible time that like you shouldn't do anything basically. But the truth is that Mercury retrogrades are better for like trying new things and experimenting, and it's a fantastic time for that. But it is also not the best time to like sign a contract or get something that's more set in stone, because things often change during the retrograde, right? So you kind of would expect that. So little things like that, you can use the weather in personal life and in business and in relationships as well. Again, if you're going to form a partnership with someone, you can kind of see if the energies are conducive, both at that time and then with each other in the case of relationships. Yeah.
He's so curious to see what Bill Gates' chart looks like, or Anthony Fauci's chart. I would love to know kind of what their life path is.
Yeah, I can't say I've looked at them, but now that you mentioned it, I definitely will after the show.
I know that over the course of history that different administrations have used astrologers, and famously Ronald Reagan used an astrologer.
Mm-hmm.
So I know that this is a path that people have gone down in the political sphere specifically. But it would be interesting to see how this is all mapped out with the birth of the vaccine, because as you said, there is a rollout date for that. So that's basically, would the birth of that vaccine be the day that it was conceived, the day that it was actually manufactured, or would it be the day that it was first rolled out? So do you use astrology when you're going into like the medical sphere, for example? So if you were going to get a surgery, or if a family member was going to get a surgery, would you plot that out?
Yeah, something important like that, I do. Yeah. Again, not so much day-to-day stuff, because it kind of does, in a sense, just like any other tool, it can separate you from just the natural flow of things. But getting too caught up into it mentally and trying to understand your whole life, like there's supposed to be an organic way of going about life, right? But with important things like that, yeah, absolutely, like surgeries, important dates, where it is important that you pick the right one, let's say, and you want to be in accordance to it. Yeah. And you can see, what are more, again, conducive days for medical stuff, among other things. And you can even see, with astrology, speaking of medical, like you can also see what's most likely. Again, we're dealing in the realm of probabilities with astrology. So it's what's most likely to be a health ailment. So you can kind of help also diagnose with medicine, and then also natural remedies that might be used, or things like this, using it from a more medical sphere. So I'm not personally into the medical astrology per se, like I'm definitely not the professional in that particular area, but in a general sense, definitely for timing. And then you can, it's quite easy actually to be able to see if someone's having a particular ailment or something like that, what might be the remedy, what might be really going on under the surface, at least on some level, just shed more light on the situation, so you know what it might be stemming from, whether it's muscular or like all these things have, much like alchemy, the body has a certain frequency and certain elements about certain things, like the nerves or the muscles or the skeletal, and the astrology can show if it's coming from more of one of those frequencies over others, essentially. Yeah. Or certain parts of the body. Yeah.
It's easy for me, who is very ill-informed about all of this, but to sort of take for granted the fact that we have sort of this sky map to reference. We know where the constellations are in relation to one another. We know where certain stars appear, how they travel across the sky. But who were the people that, and also we hear about ancient civilizations that seem to be very connected to these celestial bodies, for lack of a better term, without having the equipment that people later on did. But who originally mapped the sky and the constellations that astrology references?
We don't know, but Western astrology definitely has its, and even Hindu astrology, you could argue, has its roots at least as far back as the Assyrian Empire. So pre-Babylonian time periods, and then depending on how far back you date ancient Egypt, of course, then that, depending on how you date that could be even before that. So at least that far. But me personally, I believe we've been basically doing this ever since we were sentient, like being able to simply, look up at the sky and tell stories at the campfire, kind of thing. So possibly hundreds of thousands of years. Yeah, definitely, as we've said, at least tens of thousands, but possibly longer. And it's just a sort of language that's developed, over time. But in terms of the techniques we're using, yeah, then we would say pre-Babylonian for sure, at least. Which is also the same time we started with language, so it makes sense, and calendars. That's kind of what it's almost like astrology was always there, but because of the invention of the alphabet and being able to write things down, it became more of a science, like a technique or math. It's like the same time mathematics started to come about, then it became more of a tool in that sense. Yeah.
And this may also sound like a very childlike question, but it's just because I simply don't know, and I've really not pondered it before, but did the constellation shapes come before the attributes of those constellations, or vice versa?
Yeah, it's an excellent question. So obviously there's different beliefs on that. What I personally believe is that the constellations, they're just it's just a bunch of stars, or luminaries in the sky. But what humans did is they anthropomorphized them, so they made them into symbols, let's say, to describe why certain things happen at certain times. So, for example, like if you look at Aries, like you could maybe make the argument that it looks like a four-legged animal, maybe, or two, like so it's the ram, okay, is what they gave it. But why isn't it a dog or some other animal? And why is it even an animal? Because it could be, honestly, you could connect the dots in a multitude of different ways. So I believe it's us as humans, we gave the symbolic representation of those clusters because when certain planets, in this case, or the traveling luminaries, entered these locations, we noticed certain things. And so when luminaries get in front of what we call Aries, it symbolizes a time of initiative and action and sort of thrusting forward, which is symbolic of the ram. So they could have chosen any other animal for that. And if you look at a bunch of different civilizations, they're all using different animals, different symbols, but they're kind of arriving at the same thing, which is that it's just a symbolic representation of when it's that time, when something is in that location. It's just they chose the ram because it symbolizes this initiative and this thrusting forward and this action-oriented energy. So I believe the zodiac's probably changed, throughout these tens and again, maybe 100,000 years. It's definitely changed throughout there. In fact, it's well documented, like certain constellations, like for example, Scorpio used to be an eagle. That was very obvious. And so they're always changing, but so it's not so much the actual, thing. It's what it represents, because these are just the symbols of like the energy of life, basically, because you can't even really describe this stuff. Like I'm trying to describe Aries as like initiative and all this, but really these are just man-made concepts that we're just kind of trying to conceptualize this abstract energy that is this fire. And it's taking away from it. So it's not the true essence. We just kind of use language to try to get close, to try to point to what it means. But really, when you're dealing with the zodiac, and what astrology is as a language, is it's really it's an abstract language. It's like life in and of itself, kind of depicted in more of an abstract sense, right? Because it's us humans that try to make things into concepts and put it into a box, but things are so much more dynamic. Like a tree, you can call a tree, but like by doing so, you're actually limiting what it is by labeling it and simplifying it. So a tree is more meant to be experiential. And I think that's what the astrology is, more of the abstract experiential thing that we try to describe into words. So Aries is just this symbol. And in ancient, Greece, for example, they did a very good job with using these stories, these myths, to describe the energy, right? So all the gods, and these are all to describe this energy of life. But that's what the intention is. So instead of just trying to put it into a box, I think the best way of experiencing it is, okay, we're using the ram because what does that feel like? And what is that experience like? And so it's more, experiential feeling. It's more of an abstraction. And then from there, doing our best to try to describe what might happen or what the time period will be like when something's in that constellation. Yeah. So long story short, it's just, I think the humans that created these symbols to describe, to kind of give us a kind of abstraction of what happens when the planets are in these particular locations. Yeah.
So do you think that the purpose, or maybe a couple of purposes of simplifying astrology for the masses would be, one, to maybe make it seem like something that's much more insignificant than it actually is, or two, as we discussed earlier, to sort of further disconnect us from the larger. I mean, like, I think that mankind tends to separate themselves or think that they're separate from the natural world, from the natural order of things. But really, I think we're very intrinsically intertwined with all of that. So to, relegate astrology, which is obviously a very complex science, to something that is, as we discussed earlier, very easily summed up in a newspaper clip, seems to be belittling and also de-signifying. I don't know if that's even a word. Delegitimizing our place in the universe and our importance. Yeah. Do you think that that's the case? I mean, do you think it's a mixture of both of those?
Yeah, I think it's both. Yeah, exactly. I mean, fundamentally, you could say it's, to remove us from our natural connection. And here's where we could get all philosophical.
Let's do it.
We could say our natural connection to God. We could say our natural connection to the universe, to nature, to our essential being. But in either case, in all those cases, it's to disconnect us from the essence of things, or our true nature, even however you view that, or God. So because their plan, is, as everyone knows, is to gain more power, and particularly in the physical sense. And there's honestly no better way to do that than to remove the individual from that source. And it goes into many different areas. Like even like with the COVID thing, it was very obvious, like how that was isolating everybody. And like, if you're going to try to, control a large group of people, I mean, what better way than just completely isolate everyone, destroy the family network, the community network, even relationships I've noticed are like, and not just with COVID, but just like with all this politicizing and stuff, particularly in the States, it's really separating families and marriages and all kinds of relationships and stuff. So it's really, separating the individual from nature. It might be, and God and others. So that is just totally easy to control them. Yeah. And then everything else, like the making astrology seem like it's hogwash or it's just entertainment and all this other stuff, is just kind of caking it on to further, I think, that essence, which is to separate everybody individually. Yeah.
Sometimes a concept that's hard for me to wrap my mind around is the fact that these elites are privy to the real deal, and that they're just sort of dangling the stupid bullshit version of astrology in front of us, because they seem so very materialist, reductionist, so into scientism, but obviously that's probably a facade, and we're supposed to be thinking that they could never do anything like that, because they have Neil deGrasse Tyson telling us how we're supposed to view the universe and how it works. So I think sometimes I have a hard time thinking that that's the case. Do you think it's, and I know, I mean, this is obviously just conjecture, but is it the elites themselves, or is something maybe a little bit higher than that? Like they're taking their cues from something that, I don't know what I'm trying to get at, but not like a shadow government, but I don't know. Help me out here. Do you understand what I'm trying to say? You don't. You're still waking up. I guess it's just hard for me to, and I'm not saying it's not the case by any means, but I have a hard time thinking that Joe Biden has any knowledge of sidereal astrology or the importance of that at all, much less, how to put on his own shoes. But so I wonder who does. So obviously he doesn't. I wonder who is, sort of pointing him in the right direction. But you could say that about anything. Who's the puppet master, the behind the scenes orchestrating all of this stuff. But it's interesting.
Yeah.
I mean, have you, since you've been into this, and I want to actually get into how you got into this, but have you seen very tangible situations where, things have definitely been moving by some greater clock on some greater time frame? like 9/11,
mean,
for instance, or
yeah. So that is happening, for sure. And the Hindu astrologers are particularly good at mapping these cycles, larger cycles, macro and micro cycles. So, from my work, like I'm dealing more with micro cycles, but there's macro cycles that are like thousands of years, tens of thousands of years. Like we were talking about precession, so I mean, this is like, 26,000 years. So there's some of these cycles that are massive. And you could certainly argue that, like right now, we're definitely on this, either at the low point or like getting close to the low point or starting to come up or something, but definitely on that lower part of the cycle where everything's just really dense. And, it's more of like the sort of destruction energy and rebuilding kind of a thing. So that's going on for sure. But when it comes to the individuals that know this, and again, are utilizing the cycle, so whatever we want to call them, let's say the elite, this is all, it's all hierarchies, right? So like Biden, for example, is not an elite. He's just a puppet that was put there. And even the people directly tying his shoes and putting him on bicycles and stuff don't even know either, but then they're obviously part of a hierarchy. And then so it's just a matter of, and I think this is where you're going with this, is like, okay, well then how far does it go? And then what is the core of it? Or where does this start? Or how deep does this actually go? And honestly, I haven't, there's no way of knowing. I have no idea. But I personally do believe this is more of like a spiritual thing going on, spiritual battle, if you will. And you could even say that there's, that at the very least, the elites are praying to and gaining and giving power from some other realm, I believe, because I do believe there's other dimensions and other entities and other dimensions. And I do believe, this is really going down. This is like, I'm trying to get to the core thing. So this is like really deep down that rabbit hole.
good.
But my point here is that like, it's all just hierarchy. And even these so-called elites, wherever the top is, probably the bankers or whatever it is, they're praying. I believe they're doing these rituals. They're contacting and being contacted by, call them demonic or other types of entities that don't have, our interest in mind, maybe want to enslave humanity, or there's some sort of battle going on there. And it goes beyond the physical realm. I believe it goes into into that more spiritual area. But I like to focus on what we can do. And so as humans, this is very much a physical experience we're having. We are spiritual beings. And that's why I was saying it's so important to be connected to our spirituality. But, in this physical plane, I think it's as simple as just doing our best as a humanity to become more conscious of the fact that there are other humans who have, throughout all of our known history, been constantly trying to enslave or get more power or take control of everybody else. And there's a few of them. And the more of us that wake up to this, then all that other stuff, if that even exists, the deeper stuff doesn't even matter. Because again, we're having this physical experience, on Earth with these other humans. Yeah. Or maybe not. But anyways, again,
things that appear as humans. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it seems like disconnecting us from the natural world, the natural scheme of things would be a big part of that. That would be a huge advantage. I mean, when you really think of the word media, it's in between you and something else. So, when people are paying attention to the media, especially, they're not paying attention to what's going on around them. They're looking at something, a go-between in between them and direct access to, could be a larger system of nature, could be themselves, could be anything. And that's another thing that I think came into play with the pandemic too, is everybody was looking at their screens. They were looking for information. They weren't looking around them and seeing how many people actually weren't sick and weren't affected by all this. Were Amish communities falling prey to this, dying by the dozens? No, they weren't. There was the meme going around saying how has this not affected your community? It's because we don't have TV. So I think media can plant seeds with things. And this also, the calendar goes into this too, because that's another way that we measure time and that we measure the procession, the timeline of a given year or a month, as they used to be called. What do you think a more accurate calendar would be to adopt as opposed to the Gregorian one that we follow now?
Right. And that just hit so many points. Like, that is what's going on, is like, it's that there have always been these elite or whatever trying to put something in between us and the natural world. So, and like you mentioned science earlier, and like they appear to be all about science, but really like science now is really not very much different from like what the church was a couple thousand years ago. It's basically this like sanctioned entity or group of entities that can dictate what is fact and what isn't, and what can be practiced and what is true and what isn't true. So it's always, this thing of like putting something, I never thought of it until it really just hit home with what you said about the media, is putting something between us and God, or us in the natural world, to separate us from that. So so the calendar would definitely be one of those things, because it does not align with the seasons. So obviously it doesn't with the months. It's kind of close, but there would be 13 months. And then, of course, with the solar year, they started the Gregorian calendar on January 1st, in the sense that it, like, what does that correspond to? Well, that's like something like, I don't know, what is it, like almost 10 days or something from the solstice, the winter solstice. Why did they choose 10 days after the winter solstice, right? So astrology is actually, and astronomy is the real clock, the natural clock, because it's consistent. But again, they're creating this man-made thing to say, okay, we're going to start the year here. It might as well just be a random place as far as I'm concerned. Why doesn't the Gregorian calendar actually start on the winter solstice, which would make total sense? And why aren't our months corresponding with the moon? Why doesn't the beginning of the month start with the moon? So these are things, again, removing us from nature, because these are all cycles. And even for those listening that maybe don't believe astrology, is a thing, like even as simple as the fact that we are all attuned to the moon, like it's very obvious, like it's very scientifically verified that the moon does have an impact on our bodies and on the oceans, obviously, and anything with water. So, we do go through these cycles with the months. And so it would make sense that we would start the beginning of a month, with the new moon, knowing that it's the beginning of that cycle and that our bodies are doing a bit of a reset or whatnot at that time, or the energies, maybe it's not as much pull from the moon or whatever the reason, but that's being more in alignment with the nature. And then even more obvious is, of course, we should start the year at the low point, or at least on one of the solstices or equinoxes, but it makes sense in the winter because that would be the low point of the solar cycle. So as we all gain more energy, as the earth gets hotter, warmer, and nature starts to become more abundant, that we would base our cycle around that. And so that's, a very natural thing. But instead, we have someone telling us, or we all collectively agree, that it starts here at some random point, or hopefully not worse, hopefully 10 days after the solstice isn't some, I don't know, thing, some ritual or something, who knows? But it definitely separates us from nature. And, we're starting our new year here. And really, we should be starting in the solstices or in the equinox and being more in tune with those important seasonal events,
That's something that's kind of under contention too, is when the actual equinoxes and solstices occur. Is there a way that lay people can figure out when those actually happen? Because sometimes they differ, right? Depending on where you're at in the realm or on the planet, depending on how you look at it.
Well, I mean, yeah. So like, obviously, so the northern and southern hemisphere. So the winter for us would be the summer for the southern. And then of course you have everyone who's next to the equator, which don't really feel the seasonal changes much. But it's still part of the energy of the globe. When you start talking about like the earth itself has energy. And so even if you're not experiencing, say you're on the equator, you're not experiencing the seasons, like I still believe that the earth is going through this cycle. So yeah, so maybe, the new year would start for the Northern Hemisphere in our winter, and then in the Southern Hemisphere, they would start their new year in our summer in the Northern, right? So maybe they would swap it. So it always struck me as odd. I've never lived in the Southern Hemisphere, but it's always struck me as odd as like, they're basically adopting all these Northern Hemisphere ideas, like to have Christmas and like all this during their summer, and yeah, maybe it should be more, regional in that sense, where the South starts their new year when it's their winter. So our summer solstice in the North, kind of a thing. Yeah. But in either case, this is far better than what we have with the Gregorian. Yeah.
So you said globe. So obviously that's your cosmology. I know that you were on Crow's show, and Crow, he kind of leaves it a little more open, flapping in the wind. But so is that you subscribe to the, and I'm not coming from a place where I'm siding with either or. I'm very open to all ideas, but you think we're on a ball with other balls?
Well, no, that's not what I meant by globe. I mean, the truth is I don't know. And frankly, it doesn't really matter to me in the sense that it doesn't affect my experience with the natural world and astrology. But honestly, I don't know. I haven't gone into space or whatever and looked down, or I haven't gone to the edge of the earth or anything like this. So really, I honestly don't know. But the globe thing, that's just probably from school. I don't know. The world was where I was going with that. Yeah.
Yeah, I understand. So I have also heard you mention, and obviously other places mention luminaries. There's luminaries and then there's planets. What is the difference between those two things? Or how do you define luminary?
So luminary would be that, again, I don't know if they're actually planets, right? I mean, certainly not in the sense of how we're taught what a planet is. So you have a luminary that's fixed, which we call a star. And then you have a luminary that is moving, that is called a planet. And so planet, I think, translates as it translates to traveling star or something. So traveling luminary. So really, when I say luminary, I'm referring to all the bodies in the sky, including also the sun, moon, me personally. But planets, I would say that the moving ones, the ones traveling, and then the stars is the fixed ones. Yeah.
So to call back to something that was brought up earlier. So you said that a lot of people have the misnomer that astrology can predict things, like things are fixed and it can point to that. But would it be more accurate to say that it can predict the conducive circumstances for something to happen?
Yeah. So exactly. So it's all probabilities, right? So like, we can say that during a storm, there's going to be a high probability of a flood or something like that. Not just negative things either, but like, we have good weather coming. So there's going to be a high probability that the crops are going to grow well and stuff like that. We're going to get rain and, but it's still probability. So, but when you do see a lot of things lining up where you get a lot of confirmation or what we call confluence, where a lot of things are pointing towards the same thing, then you can have greater conviction that there's a higher likelihood of something. And again, it's very much like the weather. That's one good thing I think of the way they do it is it's all percentage chances. So obviously if it's in the 90% chances, it's almost certainly going to happen. But it's important to also, not be absolute with it to say it's certainly going to happen, because then you're really limiting the experience. And this could be You know, this could range from a whole slew of things. Like when I give readings, I, won't say like, this is going to happen in the future for you. And I make it very clear that there's a probability, high or low, whatever it is, that something like this might happen. Because honestly, we don't know how powerful we are as humans. And this kind of goes to the other point of like the importance of being connected to the essence of things is like, I think we're extremely powerful. And especially when it comes to creating our reality. And so if we believe something's going to happen and we really believe it, then you have an extremely high probability it's going to happen. And so if you go to say someone that there's a hurricane coming, and I've always wondered this too, like, I wonder if like you could actually, by manipulating the collective consciousness, actually have physical events happen. So that's kind of an extreme, but on let's say not as extreme level, but still extremely important would be the obvious fact that through the media and through these other things, they are basically creating our future. Because if you're able to change the perception of so many people and now the whole world, to an extent, you're basically able to create the future.
Absolutely.
So with astrology, it's very important not to get into that mindset where it's like, okay, this is going to happen, because our perception is extremely powerful. I think that's a very important thing to keep in mind when using these kinds of tools, like astrology. Yeah.
There's a great movie. It's a Disney movie, strangely enough, but I think it has a really powerful message called Tomorrowland. And it's about this a group or a person, megalomaniac, who starts broadcasting predictions of the end of the world and how bad things are going to get and how all these natural disasters and all this stuff happening. And through many strange circumstances, this group of kids finds out that this is just a broadcast. These are not real glimpses into a future that's tangible and is inevitable, but something that's being broadcast, and how it emphasized how important, exactly what you were talking about, how that kind of prediction or alluding to some inevitability can actually bring it into being. And I think that we are extremely powerful. I think that is a reason, amongst the manipulation of astrology, in many other ways, we're being sort of hoodwinked into thinking that we're insignificant, random products of just some rock that hit another rock, and then goop turned into a caveman, and then turned into, we're meant to be seeing ourselves as insignificant and lucky that we even exist. And then it's somehow we've morphed into the same shit, different day reality where, it's just the same drudgery. And the idea is just to gather, as many toys as you can and to get through it as painlessly as possible. And hopefully you'll die a painless death. And it's like so dour, and I don't think it's that way at all. I think we do have a great influence on our lives, and I think it's important that we remind ourselves of that and remind each other of that. So that's one of the many reasons I like what you're doing. It's because it's giving that power back to people, that they do have some influence over their existence, and that they are a part of some greater cosmological scheme of things.
Yeah, I agree 100%. Yeah. Again, I think that's the most important thing. Yeah.
I think one thing that you're both touching on is that we are being told what the world is. So we're being told that we are lazy. We're being told that we're not very smart. We're being told that that reality is a foregone conclusion, and that we have very little influence in that. And I think that's a big part of why, if there were a group that we could call an elite, why they are have the level of influence they do have is because this is the mesmerism. We keep hearing these things. You're lazy, you're stupid, you're not empowered. And so you hear that enough, and that, that's the constant tune that's being played in the background. That's the white noise. And so they're relying on that. They're relying that people will accept that as reality. And I don't think we're disconnected from nature. I think that's, again, what we are being told, is that the future that we need to adopt is a future of post-humanism, that being a human, the things of the natural world, those are outmoded ideas, and those are outmoded mechanisms that we use, and they're not necessary anymore. And I think that's a really important thing to recognize, is that we are connected to nature, and we've never lost that connection. It's, are we buying into this narrative that we are being sold?
Yeah, exactly.
So it's more of like them getting in the way of our perception.
Yes.
And changing our perception through all these medias and things. And then from there, it changing us, and then doing what they want to do, or, that's their way of having the control.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Well, and that's the important,
that's
the interesting thing about this whole experiment, the pandemic experiment, because this was an experiment. What it was about was, how compliant will people be? Will they, if we say, okay, let's lock down the world, will they do that? And I think that's the thing that has been so astounding, is how easily manipulatable humans are, is that we'll go along with it.
Yeah, that is the thing, is like, we are community beings. Like, we've been a part of tribes and our community, like, throughout most of our history. And with that comes what they call in psychology a bit of groupthink, and when everyone else is doing stuff standing out against that would in the past mean death. So it's in our own nature to actually not disrupt the collective very much, so I think they're using that for sure, to, again, right. And then the remedy to that would be to actually, which is, thank goodness for the internet and the fact that we can do like what we're doing today. And there are these communities online, but to get into these communities that do share these, like this stuff we're talking about, of the importance of perception and nature and all this, because now we don't have to do it alone. We can actually have our group think, so to speak, within our own community, and recognize it as separate. But of course, they're wanting to make the whole world this one community thing, and in that way control us even more. So so groupthink is a dangerous thing. I mean, that's just what I call it, the groupthink. But that collective not wanting to stand out. And I find myself doing it too. Like, I can't help it, like if I'm, because I don't wear a mask or anything, but like, if I'm like the only one in the grocery store not wearing it or something like that, and this is before when it was a thing, there was times where I'd be like, I'm just going to put it on because I'm just tired. I don't want to have all the eyes on me and the social ridiculing and this feeling that's, again, part of my nature to not want to stick out. It's tiresome, and we all do it. It's very natural, but definitely something that's important to be aware of for sure is this controlling the group and then individuals not wanting to stand out.
And that does it for the first free hour. If you'd like to hear the second hour, just go to patreon.com/themeltpodcast, where for as little as $3 a month, you can get access to full episodes, early episodes, and exclusive episodes, and also our monthly Melt meetups. In the second hour, we covered transhumanism, the pandemic, becoming more autonomous, the 13th astrological sign, And also Athen gives a coupon code for subscribers to use towards readings and towards casting charts. And you get to hear Hunter and I's commentary. Thank you all so very, very much for listening. It's very much appreciated. I hope that you were able to glean something positive or learn something from the episode. And yeah, definitely go check out Athen's site. He's got a great YouTube channel where he talks a lot about the same sorts of things that we were talking about here. Speaking of YouTube, I encourage you to go to our YouTube channel and subscribe. I think it was the David Weiss episode. He encouraged me to start posting on YouTube again because he said that he would share it and that it would get tons of views because I guess he's got hundreds of thousands of followers. And I had kind of grown sour as far as YouTube was concerned because I'd got a couple of episodes pulled and for ridiculous reasons. So I decided to give it a try again, and it's been very successful. So yeah, if you like what you hear here and you're looking for a way to support us and maybe you don't have the finances to do such, subscribing to us on YouTube would be a good way of doing that. And the link, along with other links about in regards to how to reach us, are in the episode notes. I'm sorry, my exhaustion is showing. Thank you all so very much for listening. It's very much appreciated. And we've got tons of great stuff coming up. So stay tuned. And until next time, take care, people. If you've liked what you've heard and would like to contribute to the Melt, there are a few ways that you can do that. The most tangible would be financially. Just click the Patreon link in the episode notes, and there you will find ways that you can contribute for as little as $3 a month. This will give you access to bonus episodes, early access to regular episodes, and you can also participate in monthly Zoom meetups. Contributing financially will also help make the Melt better, pay the bills, and help to make this podcast a full-time endeavor that I can fully devote my time to and provide you with more content. Another way of contributing would be to go to wherever it is that you subscribe to The Melt and give it a favorable review or rating, and this will help it to reach more people. You can also spread the word to friends and family via social media, email, or word of mouth. And lastly, if none of those options are readily available or appealing to you, simply send your positive thoughts and intentions. In an interconnected and quantumly entangled multiverse, these also go a long way. Thank you.